After studying this module, you shall be able to understand the meaning of market power, how is market power determined, identify the relationship between market power and elasticity of demand, evaluate how the market power arises or what are the sources of market power, analyze the different methodologies or approaches to measure market power. Now, I will give a brief introduction of the module. The previous modules described the various market structure, their characteristics and their relationship with the market conduct and performance. This module will briefly compare the characteristics of each of the market forms on the basis of various criteria. It will define the market power and describe how it is determined under various market forms. It also discusses the source of market power and the different approaches used to measure it. Thus, this module will help in understanding in detail about market power, its determinants and its measurement.
Now, we will compare various market structures. Market structure refers to the nature and degree of competition in the market for various goods. The determinants of market structure for a particular good can be classified as follows. First determinant is number of sellers. Market structure varies depending on the number of sellers in the market. It varies from a large number of sellers in perfect competition to a single seller in pure monopoly and to a few sellers in oligopoly. Second determinant is number of buyers. Market structures are influenced by the number and nature of buyers in the market. If there is a single buyer in the market, it is called monopsony market. Such markets exist for local labor employed by one large employer. There may be two buyers who act jointly in the market. This is called duopsony market. There may also be few organized buyers of a product. This is known as oligopsony market. Duopsony and oligopsony markets are usually found for cash crops such as rice, sugarcane, etc., when local factories purchase the entire crops for processing. Third determinant is the nature of the product. A market with product differentiation with close substitutes is characterized by monopolistic competition. In case of no product differentiation, there exists perfect competition. If the products have no close substitutes and are completely different from each other, there is pure monopoly in the market. Fourth determinant is the condition of entry and exit from the market. Market structures are also influenced by conditions of entry and exit from the market. Profits in a market will attract the entry of new firms and losses lead to the exit of weak firms from the market. In a perfect competition market, there is freedom of entry and exit of firms, but in monopoly and oligopoly markets, there are barriers to entry of new firms. In oligopoly markets, there are barriers to entry of firms because of collusion, cartels, etc. On the other hand, there are no restrictions in entry and exit of firms in monopolistic competition due to product differentiation. Fifth determinant is economies of scale. Firms with large economies of scale tends to achieve the market demand and grow large in comparison to other firms. They tend to weed out the other firms with the result that a few firms are left to compete with each other. This leads to the emergence of oligopoly. If only one firm attains the economies of scale to such a large extent that it is able to meet the entire market demand, there is monopoly. On the basis of competition, market structures can be classified in the following ways. First, perfect competition. Second, monopoly. Third, monopolistic competition. And fourth, oligopoly. Following table presents and compares the characteristics of each of the market forms on the basis of various criteria. From the following table, we find that differences in market structure are arising due to the differences in the number of sellers, pricing power, barriers to entry, profits, and competition policies of a firm. In this context, it becomes imperative to understand the various sources through which a firm can establish its influence in the market, what is the meaning of market power, and how it is measured. In the next section, we would be discussing all these issues. Now, we will discuss the concept of market power. Market power is defined as the ability of the firm to profitably raise the market price of a good or service above marginal cost. In perfectly competitive markets, all firms sell at an identical price that is equal to their marginal cost. No individual firm possesses any market power. If any firm were to raise its price slightly above the market determined price, it would lose all of its customers since they would switch to other firms who continue to sell at the market price. The standard definition of market power is to define it as the divergence between price and marginal cost expressed relative to price. In mathematical terms, L is equals to P minus MC divided by P, where L is the indicator of market power, also referred to as Lerner's index. P is the price at which firm sells its output, and MC is the marginal cost of the firm. When P is equals to MC, the perfectly competitive firm is selling a homogeneous product, then L is equals to 0. If P is greater than MC, then L is greater than 0, which is an indicator of market power, and one may think of the opposite of competition, monopoly, which is a single seller of a distinct product without close substitutes. The monopoly outcome and the perfectly competitive outcome is compared and represented as follows. In following figure, we present a simple downward sloping linear demand curve for a good and a linear average cost curve for producing that good. The vertical axis denotes the price, whereas the horizontal axis denotes the quantity. If a large number of sellers of this item have the same cost, then the competitive outcome will be P is equals to MC with an aggregate market quantity of QC. Equilibrium point in this case is denoted by point Z. However, if a single firm faced the same demand and cost conditions, then monopolist price would be higher at PM and quantity lower at QM. Equilibrium point is denoted by X in case of a monopoly. In terms of equation 1, Lm is equals to Pm minus Mc divided by Pm, which is greater than 0, while Lc is equals to Pc minus Mc divided by Pc is equals to 0, where Lm and Lc denotes the Lerner's index in case of monopoly and competition respectively. Thus, Lerner's index represents real market power. It also indicates the presence of above normal profits for the monopolist and their absence for competitors. Now, we will look at the relationship between market power and elasticity of demand. The degree to which a firm can raise price above marginal cost depends on the shape of the demand curve at the profit maximizing output. Elasticity is a critical factor in determining market power. The relationship between market power and the price elasticity of demand can be summarized by the following equation. P by MC is equals to E by 1 plus E, or P minus MC by P is equals to minus 1 by E, where E is the elasticity of demand, which is negative. Thus, the RHS ratio in equation 3 is always greater than 1. As elasticity of demand increases, the P by MC ratio approaches 1 and the market power approaches 0. The higher the P by MC ratio, the more market power the firm possesses. Sources of market power. A monopoly exercises market power as it has no competitors. Thus, the key to market power is to preclude competition through high barriers of entry. The different categories of barriers that act as significant sources of market power are: first is ownership of a unique resource. One of the potential barriers to entry is the ownership of a unique resource. For example, a unique mineral deposit, a distinctive patent, etc. Second is increasing returns to scale. Another important source of market power is increasing returns to scale. Firms with increasing returns to scale also experiences decreasing average total cost. As the size of such firms increases, they become more profitable. Over time, they are able to capture a greater market share and the industry is dominated by few large firms. This dominance prevents other startup firms to compete in the market. For example, power companies, wireless communication companies with large fixed costs are an example of such firms. Third is technological superiority. Firms with technological superiority have a competitive advantage over new firms. For example, Monsanto is a private seed firm that had substantial market power due to its technological superiority in developing cotton seeds. Fourth is government created barriers. Finally, government created barriers can be a source of market power. For example, patents granted to pharmaceutical companies give them a virtual monopoly in the protected product. Next, we will discuss measurement of market power. There are various methodologies that are used to measure market power. First is cross-section regressions to explain industry profit rates. Within this, various ratios and index are used. First is Lerner index. For comparison of market power across two different industries, Lerner index is widely used. It is viewed as a profitability index as the profit margin is expressed relative to P. If there are two industries in the market where industry A is a monopoly and industry B is perfectly competitive, then we would expect the Lerner index of the former to be larger than the latter. Second is concentration ratios. Another measure of market power that gained importance during the 1950s and 60s are the concentration ratios. It was postulated that market power should be positively related to the seller concentration. This hypothesis was tested through least square regressions on industry level cross section data. In these regressions, industry profit rates treated as a measure of market power were explained by a measure of industry seller concentration. The measure of seller concentration that was used was the 4 firm concentration ratio, that is CR4, which is the proportion of industry sales accounted by the four largest firms. Let SI is equals to 100 QI divided by capital Q. Denote the percentage of industry's total output sold by firm I. We call SI the market share of firm I. Let QI denote the output of firm I, where I is equals to 1, 2, and so on till n. Thus, capital Q is equals to summation Qi, where I is equals to 1 to n. Let us order all the firms in the industry so that firm 1 would have the largest market share, firm 2 the second largest, and so on. We define the 4 firm concentration ratio by I4 is equals to summation Si, where I stands from 1 to 4. These studies revealed a positive relationship between profits and CR4, implying that companies in more concentrated industries were more likely to be exercising market power. However, this measure was not free from limitations. Firstly, it ignored all firms beyond the fourth largest and also did not account for the relative distribution among the first four. Third is Herfintel-Hirschman Index, popularly known as HHI. The HHI index overcomes the limitations of concentration ratios by taking into account the sales share data for individual firms. It is defined as the sum of the squares of the market shares of the firms within the industry where the market shares are expressed as fractions. Formally, IHHI is equals to summation Si square, where I stands from 1 to n, where IHH is the Herfintel-Hirschman index. An increase in HHI indicates an increase in market power and decrease in competition. Second methodology used to measure market power is price concentration studies. An alternative way to measure market power is through testing the relationship between prices and seller concentration. It requires data on the prices of the same good that is sold in different markets where there are different levels of seller concentration. Such studies have been conducted for airlines, railroads, and banking sector. The results support that higher levels of seller concentration are associated with higher prices and thus greater market power. Third methodology used to measure market power is the new empirical industrial organization approach, popularly known as NEIO. This approach became influential during the 1980s due to increasing dissatisfaction with the cross-industry profit concentration regressions and greater availability of market data on individual product and transactions that were collected from supermarkets and other large retailers. The NEIO approach is described as follows. The demand for a product, for an industry, or for an individual firm can be represented by P is equals to function Q, X, where X represents other variables that are likely to influence demand, for example, price of substitutes, complements, and income, etc. The marginal revenue for the firm is MR is equals to delta PQ divided by delta Q, which is equals to P plus Q into delta P by delta Q, which is equals to P into 1 plus 1 by E. The cost structure of the firm or industry is given by MC is equals to G bracket Q comma W bracket close, where W represents variables that are likely to influence cost, such as input prices. The profit maximizing condition for the firm is MR is equals to MC. Thus, star 1 plus 1 by E is equals to G bracket Q comma W bracket close. The NEIO approach estimates equation 4 and 7 jointly using appropriate econometric techniques. This approach makes use of changes in the price elasticity of demand to make inferences about market power.
Now we will discuss about the auction data. Auctions are considered to be markets, and the number of bidders in an auction are indicators of the extent of competition for the item at an auction and an inverse indicator of the potential for jointly exercised market power. For example, consider procurement auctions where a buyer, for example state government, solicits bids for a specific task, for example a specific road construction project. Now the bidders are in essence suppliers that are competing on the price at which they will supply the item that is desired. The number of bidders at the auction is the approximate equivalent of the number of sellers in the market. Auction theory predicts that prices in procurement auctions will be higher when fewer bidders are present. Similarly, for an auction where bidders are competing to buy an item, prices will be lower when fewer bidders are present at the auction, which is an expression for market power on the buyer's side. Besides this, various other approaches such as Panzer-Rose approach, Tobin-Skew, etc. are being used to access market power. Let us now summarize the discussion we have done so far. Market power is defined as the ability of the firm to profitably raise the market price of a good or service above marginal cost. Market power is measured in terms of Lerner's index, which is expressed as a divergence between price and marginal cost expressed relative to the prices. In case of perfect competition, P is equals to MC and L is equals to 0, whereas for monopoly, L is greater than 0. Market power is inversely related to the elasticity of demand. Different categories of barriers such as ownership of a unique resource, government created barriers act as significant source of market power. There are various methodologies used to measure market power. The most widely used are Lerner's index, concentration ratios, Herfindahl-Hirschman index, etc. The 4-firm concentration ratio gained importance during 1950 and 1960s, used as a measure of sellers' concentration and are defined as a proportion of industry sales accounted by the 4 largest firms. However, concentration ratios are not free from limitations. HHI is defined as the sum of the squares of the market shares of the firms within the industry where the market shares are expressed as fractions. An increase in HHI indicates an increase in the market power and a decrease in competition. Besides these, price concentration studies and new empirical industrial organization, also known as NEIO, gained importance during 1980s. Auction theory predicts that prices in procurement auctions will be higher when fewer bidders are present. Similarly, for an auction where bidders are competing to buy an item, prices will be lower when fewer bidders are present at the auction.